Well, listen, we want to get started here, and we want to thank you for joining us for today's very informative program, Census 2020, Who Counts and Why It Matters. Before we begin our program, I'd like to give a very special thank you to Wells Fargo for graciously sponsoring this program and for making sure everyone had access to this information. Let's give a big round of applause to our presenting sponsor, Wells Fargo. Now please allow me another moment to recognize my fellow board members and all of our generous OC Forum sponsors for their continuous support of our programs. I'm truly honored to serve on this board as we get ready to celebrate our 30th anniversary in 2020. Will all OC Forum board members and sponsors in attendance please stand and be recognized? Board members, sponsors. Now at this time, I'd like to begin our program by welcoming our panelists to the stage. I will begin first with Dr. Matthew Friedman. And Matthew, you can come to the stage. Dr. Friedman is currently a professor of economics at the University of California, Irvine. I knew it was coming. He is also the executive director of the California Federal Statistical Research Data Center at Irvine and a co-editor at Regional Science and Urban Economics. His primary research interests are in labor economics, public finance, and urban economics. Please welcome Dr. Matthew Friedman. Next up, let's welcome Sarah Middleton to the stage. Sarah is president and CEO of Mission Up, a social change consulting firm that works alongside companies, nonprofits, and movements. Sarah has spoken at national and regional conferences, received awards for her work in corporate responsibility, and was named one of Orange County's 100 most influential people of 2015. Welcome, Sarah Middleton. All right, I think I'm going to switch mics here. Everybody got a mic? We're good?
Yeah.
Well, welcome Sarah and Matt to the OC Forum. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we've all waited 10 years for this moment, so we better get started before we have to wait another 10 years for this, I guess, movie to come out. So the census is required by the Constitution, and it began in 1790, a little while ago, and every decade since, we have conducted a census survey. Why is the census so important? I mean, why does it matter? And just to frame this in today's numbers, we are looking at a current population, correct me if I'm wrong, of about 330 million people. And they're saying it's about 140 million housing units. So why does the census matter, and especially in Orange County? Matt, can you get us started?
Sure. So I think that the census matters in a wide variety of ways. I think kind of in the most practical sense, the census matters because, of course, we need an accurate count of the population for redistricting purposes, right, for knowing where people are so we know how many representatives they need in Congress. We also need it to inform and allocate federal funding to states and localities. Of course, the number of people in different places determines a wide variety of different programs in terms of the money that's allocated to states for schools, for roads, for hospitals, for a variety of other things. It also matters in terms of on the kind of research side. So, of course, I and many other people like me use census data every day, including much of the decennial census data to inform research projects in social sciences, in public health, in education, a wide variety of things. So we rely very heavily on having accurate census data. It's also really important for business community and nonprofits because whether people are aware or not, they're often using census data for the purposes of identifying where populations, of course, live, where potential clients are located, what those clients look like, and so on. So having an accurate count is really important, kind of both in the practical sense, as well as kind of for the government, but also for everybody, right? For academics, for businesses, for nonprofits. I'm sure you want to add.
No, I think that was perfect. I mean, I think if you're looking for a quick hit, the census is about power, it's about money, and it's about health. You want to live in a healthy community, right? And the census every 10 years helps us with power, with money, and with health.
So I'm sitting here thinking about, how did you two end up getting into the census business? Can you tell us a little bit about your story, how your journey to this whole world of the census? Sarah, how about if we start with you?
Sure. Well, I totally and wholly blame Shelley Haas with the Orange County Community Foundation, if any of you know Shelley. It was about a year ago, we happened to be at the Orange County Grantmaker Summit, and there were some conversations about census happening. And Shelley roped me in at that point to start pulling together nonprofits and funders to develop a strategy for census outreach. And lo and behold, I now have a partner in crime in Ann Olin with Charitable Ventures and Heather Stratman, who's in the back of the room. My role has evolved, so, and I can get into this a little bit more, but the state of California put out an RFP for what they call an administrative CBO or an ACBO. And an executive team here in Orange County comprised of nonprofits and funders went for that bid and submitted and ultimately was awarded a contract by the state. Charitable Ventures is the holder of that contract, and so now is deploying that contract out into the community here. And my role has evolved to partnership coordination. So still pulling together nonprofits and funders and also working with several other stakeholders in Orange County to make sure that we don't duplicate efforts, that we in fact align efforts. So I'm having a lot of fun. I had no idea the importance or the value of the census until I took on this immense, wonderful, complex project. I mean, a year ago, I thought the census was just a paper form that I should probably complete. But now I am all in on the census. My family and friends are exhausted by how much I talk about it. So there you go.
That's great. My census journey began about 15 years ago. I was in graduate school, and I had no interest in federal government, or Census Bureau at the time, but my advisor had a grant that sort of necessitated that I go to the Census Bureau. I was at University of Maryland, and so I started working at Census Bureau headquarters in Suitland, Maryland. And after about 6 months or so on this grant, I was hired by Census Bureau as a statistician. And I worked at Census Bureau for the remainder of my grad school experience, a few years. Again, I started off not thinking I had any interest in federal government, but by the time I finished my stint there, I thought the world of Census Bureau. The people there were amazing, they're brilliant, they take their jobs incredibly seriously. They take the mission of the decennial very, very seriously, and the confidentiality and privacy issues, of course, incredibly seriously. So, I think I left Census Bureau with such positive feelings about it, and have tried to maintain my contact with Census Bureau ever since. Of course, the way that I'm doing it now is by directing this research data center at University of California, Irvine, which facilitates access to Census Bureau products as well as other data products from other federal agencies. It allows researchers to use these products on campus. It also provides a mechanism for researchers to provide feedback to Census Bureau and other agencies on how they use their products, kind of how they potentially could improve their products. So it's kind of a two-way street with federal agencies, and it allows me to, of course, keep in touch with people at Census Bureau and kind of keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on there. So one funny story about my Census Bureau experience. So after I finished graduate school, about a year after I finished, I had my first job. I got a knock on my door. It was a Census Bureau employee. who was conducting a survey, what's called a survey of consumer expenditures, where they track consumer expenditures. And she, explained to me what this survey was, and of course I was intimately aware of what this survey was. So it was kind of funny hearing her explain to me this. And then she said, she told me what I needed to do for the survey, and then I got a call later to ask me kind of all about my demographics, right? Because I collect a lot of information about my household composition, my income, and so on. And I think that the person who was interviewing me on the phone was struck by how much additional information that I gave her above and beyond what she asked, how eager I was to give her all of the data that I possibly could about myself. So, I kind of think back about that and how, I'm kind of constantly worried that people were concerned about, of course, answering questions for Census Bureau and such. But again, my experience with Census Bureau and the people there is that they take that issue in particular incredibly seriously. And so that's my one story about my participation in surveys, beyond Decennial, of course.
Well, thank you both. Thank you both. So the 2020 census actually has a goal. What is that goal? Count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. Let me repeat that. Count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. Can you folks unpack that goal for us? I mean, couldn't they have stopped at just count everyone?
So the counting everyone, of course, is critical, but counting them in the right place, right, is also really integral to the decennial. And it comes back to the issue of political apportionment and redistricting and allocating federal funds, right? So we need to know precisely where people are to know, of course, how many representatives they should have. It also is going to inform, of course, state decisions about redistricting, on the basis of population, again, federal funds under a variety of different federal programs are tied directly to population within areas. So we need to know, of course, not only how many people there are precisely, right, which of course is interesting in its own right, but also where precisely those people are living, because that informs the allocation of these federal dollars and, of course, the number of representatives people get in Congress, both at the federal level, but also, of course, at local, state levels.
Good on the goal. So, Matt, we are in the era of big data. Behind the scenes, the Census Bureau has been working to prepare for what we might call opening day in the spring of 2020. Are they prepared, and will the public notice anything different?
Yeah, so I think that the answer is yes and no. So, of course, Census Bureau has been working for now a number of years, kind of in preparation for 2020. In fact, preparation for 2020 census really began the day after 2010 ended. Things have been really ramping up over the kind of past couple of years. As many people know, of course, Census Bureau has had some struggles with funding and with kind of rolling out pilot programs and trial runs to the extent that they would have liked to. But at the same time, Census Bureau has been working hard to kind of incorporate kind of new techniques, new technology to try to improve the decennial in every way that they possibly can. And this has included some applications online using kind of historical data and data from other surveys that they conduct to try to pinpoint where there's going to be potential problems, right, where there might be very hard to count populations, so we can kind of allocate more outreach resources to those areas as opposed to areas where we're pretty confident people will respond. There's also, of course, one new thing that the public will notice, which is that they're, of course, going to be encouraging people to complete the census online as opposed to just on a postcard or on by mail. So the first kind of round of kind of mailers people will say, here's a code and go online and fill out the census there, right? So, of course, that will save a lot of resources in terms of mailing. And so, of course, I encourage you to do that. And so the public will notice kind of that part of it. But behind the scenes, of course, it's kind of worthwhile knowing that the Census Bureau, and for that matter, individual states and localities, are implementing a lot of new technology this time around that they didn't do last time. All in an effort to improve the quality of data. Because again, it all comes back to the fact that, knowing how many people there are and precisely where they live is really important, not just for, of course, the national federal government, but for individual states and localities as well. And so, the fact that the state is pouring tons of resources into outreach, and individual localities are also kind of putting pressure on people to fill out the survey, I think is testament to the fact that it really matters, right? Not just to the federal government, but to state and local governments as well.
Yeah, so just to put things in perspective, in 2010, the state of California deployed about $2 million for census outreach, and our state suffered a massive undercount. So this time around, the folks in Sacramento said, we don't want to let that happen again. And so far, there have been more than $100 million plowed into census outreach up and down the state. I would say 2/3 of that funding has been going to ACBOs, like Charitable Ventures, and counties, because these are the groups that are charged with education and outreach to California's hard-to-count populations, of which the state has said there are 15 hard-to-count populations. Additionally, talking about data, the state has created a system called SWORD. SWORD stands for, and there are like a zillion acronyms when it comes to census, so it's kind of difficult to keep track of all of it. But SWORD stands for Statewide Outreach and Rapid Deployment System. And if all goes well and if it works properly, this system updates on a weekly basis to let all of the state's contractors know, here's who's responding, here's who we've reached out to, and here are where the gaps are. And this is where we need to really put the pedal to the metal and make sure that we get these folks counted. So even now, our Charitable Ventures team, we're working with our subcontractors, and I see some of you in the room, which is fantastic, to gather data on a weekly basis to say, okay, how many touches have you had with your hard-to-count communities? So we're compiling that information. It gets uploaded to SWORD weekly so that the state can really monitor, okay, what's happening up and down California right now.
Thank you, Sarah. And Sarah, as a follow-up, I think what we have understood, at least from the data, that the Census Bureau has concluded that response rates are actually declining. As citizens are really, and we all know this, we're all bombarded with surveys, lots of surveys. So when we look at that problem, are we still worried about this? And you've mentioned a new system here, but are there other things that are being done to counter that issue of just being bombarded with surveys? Are people going to pay attention this time?
Yeah, I think it goes beyond bombardment. I think there's definitely a culture of fear out there. There are lots of things that are different with the 2020 survey. Matt mentioned this is the first time that the census is going online. So consider all of those people who don't have broadband access or who have low broadband access, or seniors who might not be familiar with the internet and how to respond to a survey on the internet. So that's a big change. There's been underfunding at the Census Bureau, so that's a big change. There's been a leadership change not too long ago at the Census Bureau. Then you've got the citizenship question, which let it be known that the citizenship question will not be on the survey, but damage has been done in immigrant communities. So you've got barriers to completing the census at many different levels. So part of the communication and the messaging is, hey, we know this is another survey, but actually it's not another survey. This survey only comes 10 years, and it's highly critical that we get everybody to complete this survey. This survey and its results impact the next 10 years of our collective lives. Additionally, it's even that much more important for our hard-to-count communities to complete this survey. Their voices right now are underrepresented. Do we want that to happen for another decade? Absolutely not. We need to make sure that we're getting the resources into our community that we deserve. We need to make sure that we've got the right schools, that we've got the right languages being spoken in hospitals. I mean, all of this is critical. So messaging is it's one of the most important pieces for the 2020 census, and there are certainly lots of groups who are working on messaging. Folks like NALEO, folks like Asian Americans Advancing Justice, they've already put out some messaging. Up and down the state, we're working as ACBOs and counties to determine what's the right messaging for our region. What will work here in Orange County will be different than what will work in the Central Valley or even in the Bay Area. So we're working internally here and getting some help from statewide marketing and PR firm and others to determine what are the right pieces, what are the right messages to communicate. And I would say too, Ann and Heather, if at any point you want to jump in and augment or correct what I'm saying, please do.
Thank you. So the 2020 census is actually going to begin January 1st in Alaska to get an early start on the hard-to-survey populations. Can either of you address any of the hard-to-survey population issues in Orange County? And are there any special efforts, maybe like going on in Alaska, to get to them?
Sure. So we have just over 3 million residents here in Orange County. About 25% are considered hard to count. Does anybody have a guess on what a hard to count population might be in Orange County?
Southeast Asian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that rolls up into the API population. Sure. How about another one? Homeless, indeed.
0 to 5.
0 to 5. Children 0 to 5. Latinos. Mm-hmm. Yeah. People with disabilities, LGBTQ, seniors, immigrants and refugees, Native Americans, African Americans, veterans. Who else am I forgetting? Low and no broadband access. I may be forgetting 1 or 2 more populations, but there are 15 state-designated hard-to-count populations. One of those populations being farm workers, which we don't have too many in Orange County, but we certainly have all of the other populations. So here's the deal. Here's what's happening in Orange County. So Charitable Ventures received a contract for $1.4 million from the state. The County of Orange received a contract for $1.5 million. Well, that's about $3 million. There's a group called CPAN, Census Policy Advocacy Network, that, along with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, conducted some analysis for the Orange County region and other regions in Orange County, and they said, okay, really, if you want to achieve a fair and accurate count in Orange County, it's going to take about $8 million. That's a lot of money. We've got $3 million from the state, which is great, but it's certainly not $8 million. What Charitable Ventures has been doing is also establishing a pooled fund for private philanthropic dollars. We've raised nearly $1 million, which our goal was $1 million, so we're so close. So that's great. So along with the state funds and the private funds, that's $4 million. That's half of what CPAN says we really need for an accurate census. Okay, so that's the money framework. So now the action framework. So Charitable Ventures has identified 10 lead subcontractors, and we've got the Cambodian family as one of them, Community Action Partnership as another. Did I miss any of our other subcontractors in the room? Okay. And we've got others. The Cambodian family, Community Action Partnership, and let me do the quick math, 6 of our others, I think, yep, are focused on outreach. And then we've got a couple subcontractors who are focused on training. Their job is to be boots on the ground. They are phone banking. They are door canvassing. They are going out to community events and festivals. They are putting flyers in food boxes. They are speaking in language culturally appropriate. They are the ones who are the trusted messengers for their hard-to-count populations. So that's how we're making this all work. Charitable Ventures gets the money. We identify who are the right groups to take this money and get out there and get out the count. We're deploying those funds, and then the groups that we're partnering with are actually doing the very hard work. The county, and some of you may be aware, the county is also in the process of identifying subcontractors to do similar work. The county will be focusing on specific census tracts, whereas Charitable Ventures is focusing on areas and communities. Charitable Ventures just closed down its RFP for the second round of funding. So we still have public dollars to deploy, and we're now, along with a grant review committee, reading all of the additional subcontractor applications we received. We'll be doing the same thing with the private dollars. We'll be putting out an RFP next week and identifying who are the other organizations who want to take on a grant and conduct census outreach. So, you know, people, especially our hard-to-count communities, they're not going to trust the government, but they will trust their local nonprofit. They will trust their local church. They will go to their local clinic. So it's working through these groups, and again, I use the term trusted messengers, these groups who have their relationships built and can have the conversation with that individual to say, it's safe, your data is confidential, nobody's going to come after you. If you're living with, 10 other people and in a place that's designed for 4 people, you're fine. So it's so much of the relationships, the touch points, the messaging, the assurances.
I would add, you hurt my feelings a little bit. The one undercounted population that you left out, students.
Oh, yeah.
Very good, very good. Thank you very much for that. So Alaska gets to start early, but the real launch is going to be around mid-March with postcards going to, about 95% of all homes. That sounds like an unimaginable thing, but it's going to happen. You mentioned there's new leadership. I think that begs a question. Who is the quarterback here? Who's actually leading the team to make all this happen? This is a huge task, and apparently there's not an app for that.
So the new director of the Census Bureau, I think he's been on the job for 18 months, and I'm totally blanking on his name, but
The quarterback.
he's the quarterback. Yeah. So he's the quarterback at the U.S. Census Bureau, and then for states who have dedicated funding to census outreach, there's typically a state complete count office, and there's a director for that complete count office. So the state of California, we've got that office based in Sacramento, and the woman who's running census for the state of California is Didis Katagwe.
I do think, this kind of highlights that I think, of course, the census itself is very important in this process, but, really where a lot of the hard work is done is kind of on the ground, right? By enumerators, by people either, volunteering or paid by census, like really out there, or by state, of course, out there doing the hard work to count these populations, because of course that when push comes to shove, that's really what's going to make the difference.
So let's imagine the Census Bureau reaches the goal. They count everyone once, only once, and in the right place. Will it have any impact on the presidential election?
I think so. Of course, the timing of this with the presidential election is kind of interesting in that it will be happening in large part before, of course, November. We won't have any data from the decennial until December, when the census is kind of obliged to provide data to the president for redistricting, and then states will start getting data in 2021, in early 2021, for their redistricting purposes. So. I think there isn't a sense in which the data that come out of the decennial will directly have an influence on the election. I think what's more likely, of course, is that some of the rhetoric around the census can more indirectly affect the election. So to the extent that there is a lot more discussion about the privacy of census, about citizenship question, and so on and so forth. Indirectly, of course, that relates a lot to what's going on politically at national level. But I think, as was highlighted, one thing that's really important to know about the Census Bureau is that there are many levels of kind of and I'm not saying this in a negative way, but career bureaucrats at Census Bureau that take their jobs very seriously and kind of shield the agency from a lot of what's going on at the national level. Of course, they can't control the funding always, but they themselves, of course, take the job of conducting the census seriously. So I think that the process of conducting it isn't going to be a big factor for the election.
We should probably address what's really at stake here. The 2020 census, as I understand it, will determine actually where over $880 billion of federal resources will land. Not sure exactly how that works, but when we look at OC, first of all, have we been getting our fair share, and do we expect to get our fair share? That's a lot of money.
So the answer is no. And Heather, I'm thinking about you because you're working on the 0 to 5 population here and ensuring that all 0 to 5 children get counted. And in 2010, we had at least 18,000 0 to 5 who were not counted. So those are dollars that we lost out on for programs like Head Start, WIC, potentially, other federal programs. So I have here, there's a group out of George Washington University, the GW Institute of Public Policy. I'm sure you're familiar, Matt. And just to throw out some really big numbers, in fiscal year 2016, California received more than $115 billion through 55 federal spending programs guided by data derived from the 2010 census. Now, I can't tell you how many of those dollars flowed into Orange County, and how many exactly we might be missing out on because we didn't count everybody in 2010, but it just reinforces the fact that we need to count everybody so that we're getting our fair share of resources for the people who live here.
Yeah, and just to kind of come back briefly to another point that was made, right? It's certainly about the dollars, but it's also about a lot of other stuff too, right? We in the academic community, in the business community, in the nonprofit community, are using these data in a variety of ways all the time. So, certainly it's about, making sure that we're represented, making sure that we get the dollars that we deserve, but there's also a sense in which, we're making business decisions using these data all the time, and we really want to make sure that we have accurate data, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So it's really important that this survey is conducted as well as possible.
Let's talk about the off years for a minute. Again, you've got 10 years between these census times. What goes on during those 10 years, and is there other data that's coming out that matters?
Yeah, so Census Bureau, many of you may know this, does a lot of stuff besides just the decennial, right? So of course the decennial is a real focal point. It's what it's going to mandate really is to do. But Census Bureau conducts a wide variety of other surveys. So one of the more recently introduced surveys is the American Community Survey. You may remember, a long time ago, back in 2000, we used to do these. Some people would get long form decennial census, some people would get short form, right? And the long form asked a whole lot of stuff, right? A whole lot of questions about income, household composition, lots of information from people. We no longer have a long form. Everybody gets the short form, right? Just some really, really basic questions. The long form was replaced by the American Community Survey, which is a survey of a couple 100,000 people that happens every single year, and essentially asks a lot of the questions that the long form asked. And of course, the appeal of having a survey that's done every single year is that it allows us to get kind of a more real-time picture of what's happening within communities, what's happening nationally, relative to just getting the snapshot every 10 years of, say, income information and so on. So the ACS has been is great. It doesn't do the job that the decennial does in some sense, in that it doesn't give us a full and accurate count of everybody living everywhere, but it does give us kind of a rolling view of kind of what's going on in the country. It's also been useful, as kind of we've alluded, in helping in the run-up to the decennial, and by helping to identify places that are hard to survey, right, and where there may be undercount issues with the decennial census. So the ACS has been a kind of a tool that Census has been using to help with the decennial effort as well. And, you know, the census, I could talk forever about other census products. The census produces lots and lots of different surveys that help to paint a really rich picture of the U.S. population, surveys about time use, surveys about people's expenditures, the CPS, which is, of course, what is used to generate unemployment rate statistics that we get every month. It conducts surveys of establishments and firms that give us pictures of kind of what the industrial structure of the U.S. looks like and how that's changing over time. Lots and lots of things that Census Bureau does that help us kind of fill in what's happening, of course, between these decennials.
And how about the off years for you, Sarah? What do you look at with the census during those off years?
I have no idea. Well, no, I mean to couch that, there wasn't this massive effort in California in 2010. So this is really unprecedented. The state complete count office has never looked the way it is now. They're literally building this plane as they're flying it. They are figuring out, they have 210 contracts that they're managing. They are totally overwhelmed. And we're all just trying to figure this out together. So, you know, really I think for a lot of the groups that we're working with, it's maybe not so much about census, but it definitely shifts into redistricting. Next.
So you're really both on the ground, but in different ways as this moves forward. So a couple more questions, and then we'll start to get questions from the audience. So start to think about your questions here. What do you worry about with this census? And then how can we help? What are you worried about? What could go wrong here?
You know, I think I probably share concern that many people share about the census, which is, you know, I do think that a lot of the controversy about citizenship question in general has kind of fostered some fear of completing the census forms. I think there's good evidence that a citizenship question and even perhaps the possibility of that being there can depress counts among some populations. So I think that that's a real concern. And I think that, you know, there's just sort of that discussion and other issues have kind of built up just a general skepticism of government, what government might be doing with our data, our information. So I think that there is a real concern there. I think, you know, Census is trying its best to counter that, and I think, you know, lots of groups are doing an amazing job countering some of these messages. But I am concerned about that, you know, and I think that there's also, you know, Census Bureau is kind of moving into a new digital era, right, with this online census. I think there's some kind of concerns about implementation there, but you know, I think there is this mobilization that's happening at the state level and at many other levels that I think are helping enormously. You know, of course, having forums just like this one is something that's really quite important, right? People can kind of spread the word about the importance of the census, and that matters a lot, right? The word gets out. So, you know, I'm an optimist. I do have confidence that the census will be conducted well. That, you know, there will always be some degree of undercounting. We can't avoid that, but you know, I think that it will be relatively minimal, is my hope, and so I think that you know, it will be a success at the end of the day, but it's going to take a lot of work, and it's not just the Census Bureau's job to do that work. It's kind of all of our jobs. It's really on us, because it's about us. It's about our communities. It's about ensuring that we get kind of what we deserve in terms of federal dollars and resources, that we get the money we need for good schools and good roads, good hospitals, and so on. So, you know, I think you know, we should really be thinking about this is a job not for the census, not for the state. It's really our job to make sure that we do this right.
Yeah, I would say I worry about gaps. Even though we are in SORD on a daily basis, even though we are talking with our amazing subcontractors and grantees on a regular basis. Even though we're partnering closely with the county and aligning efforts, I still worry about gaps. Did we cover that area of southern Orange County where we know there might not be a swath of nonprofits, but we certainly have hard-to-count populations? Did we cover North Orange County enough? Do we have the right partners in La Habra? Or is the county taking that on? So even though we're having all of these conversations, even though we're asset mapping, there's still this nagging question, what are our gaps? Because we know we have the gaps. And so we're pushing out the work and trying to pay really good attention to where those gaps are. Paul, you asked about what can we do? So when you leave this room, make it a point to tell 10 people that the census is coming and they need to complete the census, and here's why. Have your little cheat sheet ready. These are the 3 reasons why you need to complete the census. Let them know that it's coming online for 2020. That's one opportunity for you. Another opportunity is if you're a nonprofit and you're not involved with charitable ventures yet, or if you know of a nonprofit who has a stake in the census, please direct them to charitable ventures. We've got what we call the Orange County Census Community Table, which is now 250 members strong. The vast majority of members are nonprofits, but we also have funders and higher ed institutions and the county and the state and some local team members from the U.S. Census Bureau on that table. So if you have an interest in getting regular news updates around what the census looks like in Orange County, please let one of us from Charitable Ventures know. We will gladly add you to this list. It is all inclusive. Another opportunity is to set up a questionnaire assistance center, a QAC. See, more acronyms. There's a questionnaire assistance center, and then there's a questionnaire action kiosk. And these are places where people off the street or in your community can come and get their census questions answered, get help completing the census. So if you know of a location that is safe and trusted, maybe again, it's a nonprofit partner of yours, please send them our way. We want to establish about 100 questionnaire assistance centers around Orange County, and we've got probably 40 identified right now. And the county is doing the same thing. So they're working with libraries, they're working with some of their buildings to establish QACs too. And I would say the last thing is have fun with the census. I don't want this to be doom and gloom. Yes, there has been controversy this year. Some people may say, oh, it's been really political. Also, we can have fun with this, and we should be having fun. I think it's another way to reach people. So I'm going to give a plug for this group called Count the Nation out of USC, and it's like an innovation lab, kind of. They're using some interesting methods to reach out and touch people about the census. So you can visit their website, countthenation.org, /media, and they have hilarious memes, like hilarious. Definitely spend 5 minutes today checking them out. You can post those on social media, you can send them to friends, and I guarantee you'll giggle a little bit.
That's awesome. So you can see we really can help here, and we want to thank our experts. These are 2 experts here. Let's thank them for their time today. Matt, Sarah, thank you so much. Awesome job. We want to take a moment for your questions now. We have Ariana in the back with a microphone. We have a question right up here and back here. So Ariana, if you come around.
I'm going to take the first one if you don't mind.
Please
Because I
do.
love that you ended on fun. Is there some use of census data that we don't think about or that would surprise us that uses census data that we may use all the time?
Well, I mean, there's there's lots of census data. I'm just trying to think of which survey I want to talk about. There's a. Let's see. I'm trying to think of a good one. So we use. I've used a census time use data. So Census conducts surveys of people that just basically ask, what did you do in the last day? Right, essentially, how did you allocate your time over the day? And one thing that's really amazing is that, people I think you have ideas about how you use your time, but when you're forced to sit down and diary how you use your time, find out you use your time quite a bit differently. And so, one thing I had documented is that there's a tendency for people to kind of understate how much time, of course, they spend on breaks and stuff, of course, at work, but also to understate how much time it takes to do kind of mundane things with your family in the morning. So I have 2 young kids, and so this really rang true, where I realized the other day, after having thought about this in my research, is that I was spending something like 25 minutes a day trying to get shoes on my kids. So anyway, this is it was something where census data really shed light on my own life, and in some ways how sad it is, but but I think that taking a step back, it's just such an enormous number of uses of census data. I think that most of the time we're using it either for academic purposes, for business purposes. But the data can be used to kind of shed light on just sort of more general social phenomenon that we might not think about in our everyday lives, but are really important, right? So documenting changes over time and how people use their time, also of course the location of different communities and so on. So I don't know if you have a good example.
I actually think it may have been the city of Arlington, Virginia. One of their promotional pieces was a day in the life, how census data affects your life. So if you Google some of that, it'll pop up, and it may be helpful for you. Sorry, I can't talk more intelligently about that.
And Matt, there are Velcro shoes that just...
Somehow that doesn't help.
Just a thought.
Good morning. I actually have 2 questions. To your point of the issues surrounding barriers to people filling out the census, one of the large 800-pound gorilla you didn't bring up is public charge. For those who don't know, it's the policy under this administration that is putting at-risk people if they come forward and say they are using public services like Medi-Cal, SNAP, food stamps, and they're undocumented, they can be deported. We live under a reign of terror right now. So what are you doing in terms of trying to reach hard-to-reach communities dealing with ethnic media and, like you said, trusted messengers? I just want to put a plug. I'm a physician in this community. I help the underserved. I am a trusted messenger, and I also blog and write and am an ambassador for the Voice of OC. So we have very vibrant ethnic media in language in our communities of color, and I'd like to hear what you're doing to outreach to Baunglivic, all the radio, TVs, et cetera.
Yeah, so great question. So we surveyed our lead subcontractors and asked them to send in the ethnic media that they use. So now we've got a list of all of those ethnic media outlets. And we have also shared that list with the state's PR and marketing firm. To be perfectly candid, we're not sure yet what marketing and PR looks like for Orange County with the statewide partner. Okay, so we can connect after.
So the other big organization is Asian Americans Journalists Association. They're a vibrant group. They just had an amazing event in LA, and that leadership, it just seems like a natural partner. They work closely with AAAJ, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, so just connecting those dots and trying to reach, because we have communities frightened to answer these questions. You can say, because I'm so sorry, Professor Matthew, are a privileged person who isn't at risk for deportation. And it's not a small thing to say, oh, it's a big deal. If you answer this question, you get kicked out, your family separated. I don't think people understand how severe and scary. I mean, we have community members living in fear under this administration. And that is an issue very pertinent to how are you going to count these hard-to-count communities.
Right. It is certainly in our plan to reach out to all of the ethnic media with the help of our statewide contractor. How that actually manifests itself, It's a little unclear right now, so we can definitely connect.
So I work for CHOC, Children's Hospital, and one of the things that children's hospitals across the country are really watching is there's a trend beginning of parents who may be undocumented declining Medicaid coverage for their children because they're worried about this public charge threat. And so with that concern, that, parents would actually say, I'm not going to seek medical coverage for my children because I'm worried about immigration backlash. I think I am quite worried about whether they would be willing to, participate in the census if they're willing to take that kind of a risk with their children's health just to make sure their family can stay together. So I'm just wondering, if we at CHOC were going to try to communicate, for example, with our families about the importance of the census, I do think that just telling them that they shouldn't worry about data privacy would not be enough. How would you convince them that this data is safe? If they say, well, how do you know? How can you promise me? What's the proper response to that question?
Yeah, I mean, this is where I think you're absolutely right. It's going to be incredibly hard to convince some populations that the data are safe. Like, the Census Bureau, of course, one can always emphasize that the Census Bureau is sort of separate from some of these other agencies. Data are on Medicaid and these other programs are maintained by different sets of agencies, and they aren't kind of commingled in some sense. The Census Bureau takes its job very seriously, in part because it knows that if there were any breach whatsoever, it would essentially undermine all future censuses, right? The costs of even the most minor problem on the data side would essentially do away with the Census Bureau. It would be such a problem. So, but I understand your previous point, that there are going to be populations it's going to be incredibly difficult to convince that this is important. And so beyond telling them that this is not something that federal any other federal agencies will use. It's only going to be produce aggregate statistics for the purposes of allocating federal funding. Is kind of a point that can be made. What's also kind of paradoxical about this is that it's precisely those populations that we most need to know about, for the purposes of making sure that those communities, right, where these people are living, are getting the money and the resources they need. So, there's this tension here where the people who are filling it out, or most likely to fill it out, are often in places that, are least in need of the resources that are coming their way, and the converse is also true, right? So, I think that's in part why some of these new technologies that are being used, some of the efforts that your group is doing and many of the other contractors are doing, are so important, of sort of allocating really the outreach to where it's needed most, to try to help these communities, convince these communities that this is important. But it's scary that people are turning down Medicaid, and I can appreciate that's just going to be a population that's going to be really, really hard to reach out to.
And Professor, as it happens, we have an audience member who wants to give more answer to your answer.
Oh, great, thank you.
So yes, I want to address it real directly. We've been doing a significant amount of focus group work with our community clinics, with the FRCs, with basically all the infrastructure that's built into the commission's 2 decades of work. And we are hearing that we don't think families are going to go to the clinics during the March 1st to end of April period. And so what we're doing is we are inverse going to the family case managers that we know are signing these same families up for food stamps, and we are asking those case managers to get into the households that are tripled and quadrupled up and help them fill these out. I mean, it really is going to be that much hand-to-hand. And we think that's the only tactic because we know they're not going to show up. So, yeah.
And we have one more question up at the front.
So you mentioned that we get the off-year data. and we're reaching out to hard-to-reach communities. A year from now, December 2020, 2021, are there going to be things, and as the data comes out, that are going to surprise residents of Orange County who have been here a long time? You hear anecdotal evidence of new home buyers, the last names are either Spanish or Asian. What is the county, what are we going to see coming out, project forward, that most people who have been here over 20 years are going to be like, I never realized how much the county had changed in the last 10 years?
That is a great question. I'm not sure I have an answer. I don't know. Matt, you're probably better suited.
I mean, I think, we're all kind of, I think, aware that demographic change in the county has just been enormous. And that has been kind of correlated with a lot of changes in, for example, political leanings of the county and so on. So I think there is a sense in which kind of the intercensal data that we've been collecting has maybe kind of reduced the surprises that come out of the decennials, right? Because we, of course, have some sense of what's going on in those intervening years. But the census is always full of some surprises, right? We always see, in part because of the intercensal surveys are just that. They're small samples. They don't give us a kind of a full picture of what's going on. And so there's always, the big surprises on number of people living in some communities, number of particular people who have certain subgroups, race, ethnicity, and so on. And so I think, undoubtedly we'll see that. I mean, I think we of course know that Orange County is becoming more diverse fairly quickly, both on racial and ethnic lines, but also income lines as well. It's also growing. We know there's house prices are going up. We can see population increasing. And so I think that, the decennial will probably confirm a lot of what we already know is happening, but will kind of give us a more complete picture of how it's happening and precisely where it's happening, right? What locations are seeing kind of the most change. And, of course, that's really interesting from an academic perspective, but it's just really, it's important to know for businesses, for nonprofits, for everybody to know about how these changes are happening and where they're happening. So, I'm obviously kind of a junkie on census data. So, I feel like it's like, Christmas Eve. Like I'm really, I can't wait until census data starts rolling out in 2021 and to see kind of what surprises are in store. Because I think it's always interesting and always fascinating to find out how your community has changed, how other communities have changed. So we'll see.
If I can just add quickly, I think my hope is that we count all of our historically underrepresented communities and know who's here. And I'll give you an example. American Community Survey data says that Orange County has 2,000 Samoans, but we have 16 Samoan churches. We have more than 2,000 Samoans here. So let's make sure we count them and know who's here.
Let's thank our experts again. Matt and Sarah, thank you very, very much. Also, please thank Wells Fargo again for being our presenting sponsor. Another round of applause for Wells Fargo. Thank you so much. Before we conclude today's program, I would also like to thank each and every one of you for joining us this morning. I know it was very early, and we hope that you will continue to join the conversation with the OC Forum. And if you aren't already there, please join us on social media to stay up to date with all things OC Forum. Next up is our highly anticipated Housing Outlook Luncheon. Don't have to get up as early. Taking place on Monday. Get your calendars out, December 2nd. Please mark your calendars, the Housing Outlook, Monday, December 2nd, luncheon. Now, go out and get counted. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Go have a great OC day. Thank you.